Good morning and welcome to the webinar on strategies for supporting students with an intellectual disability and students with autism spectrum disorder. We are delighted that Dr. Maria Paiwanski and Dr. Jane Therfel-Brown accepted the invitation to present today. Before I officially introduce Drs. Paiwanski and Therfel-Brown, please allow me to address a few logistical items. This is Will Francis, Project Director for Post-Secondary Education at the UCLA Tarjan Center. The Tarjan Center at UCLA is a federally designated Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and your host for today's webinar. Support for today's webinar comes from the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to community colleges, disabled students, programs, and services offices who are working to provide equitable supports, services, and opportunities for students with disabilities, including intellectual disability and autism. Today's webinar is designed to respond to the emerging needs to support students in the wake of the coronavirus. The Tarjan Center is working very closely with our federal partners at USC and the UC Davis University Centers for Excellence on Developmental Disabilities, State Council on Developmental Disabilities, Disability Rights of California, and the Department of Developmental Services to get information out to communities related to the coronavirus. The current slide provides links to information and resources that may be useful. The Department of Developmental Services in general and regional services in particular may be a useful resource for students and their families. Students in need of assistance may contact their regional center counselor. The other resources may also be useful. For today's webinar, some of our colleagues are unable to participate and have requested a recording of the proceedings. To facilitate access to a clean recording of the webinar, we have muted all calls. As we proceed through the presentations, our presenters would love to respond to questions that arise from or that are related to the content of the presentation. Please take a look at the bottom of the Zoom program display where you will find a chat box. We're asking that you insert your questions into the chat box throughout the duration of the webinar. We will address your questions and welcome you to submit as many questions as naturally arise. You may ask questions through the chat feature at any time. Each presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, and then we will offer 10 minutes for questions. At the end of the presentation, if time permits, we will field additional questions. This may be a good time to test the chat function. Please take this opportunity to enter a greeting into the chat box. Thank you. Many of your institutions were having conversations and initiating practices designed to improve outcomes that are focused on increasing the number of students who earn a degree, credential, certificate, or transfer to four-year institutions, or attain employment in high-demand jobs. In the advent of the COVID-19 crisis, it will be important for the colleges to engage with students with an intellectual disability and students with autism as soon as possible in the new online environment. In today's presentation, Dr. Paiwanski will provide strategies for supporting students with an intellectual disability. Dr. Therfel-Brown will provide strategies for supporting students with autism. To all of our webinar participants, thank you for joining us today. And now I will provide some information about our presenters. Dr. Maria Paiwanski is a program manager and transition specialist at the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, hereinafter referred to as UMB. She also serves as director of the Massachusetts Transition Leadership Initiative, a personnel preparation program that prepares master's level transition specialists at UMB. Maria has coordinated numerous secondary and transition-related projects and works with teachers, college staff, interdisciplinary team members, students, and families to develop positive and inclusive college, work, and community outcomes. Most recently, she coordinated a federally funded project called Think College Transition, partnering with 3 institutions of higher education and numerous partnering school districts to implement research and evaluate an inclusive dual enrollment transition model of services for students with an intellectual disability. Dr. Jane Theophil Brown serves at Yale Child Study, Yale Medical School, and is the Director of College Autism Spectrum and former Director of Student Services at the University of Connecticut School of Law. She has worked in disability services for 40 years. She holds a doctorate from Columbia University Teachers College. Dr. Brown consults with many families, students, school districts, and institutions of higher education. She is married and has 3 children, the youngest being a 28-year-old son with autism. Thank you, Dr. Prywanski and Dr. Jane Theophil Brown, for your willingness to share from the wealth of your knowledge with the California community colleges. And now, without further ado, here's Dr. Maria Prywanski.
So thank you very much, everyone. And my sympathies to all of us and all of you for being in this situation where we think we're sort of getting a handle on how we can best support students. And all of a sudden, every approach we think we've had is out the window. So I very much appreciate Will giving us this opportunity to talk about at least some ideas that people have been putting into place. So my focus today is going to be, for the first half of this panel, I'm going to talk about assisting college students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to move to online learning quickly. So give me one second. Again, I work at the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston as part of Think College. That is a major piece of my work. I'm a training and technical assistance advisor. So I have been doing this work for quite some time. And I do understand the challenges that we are all faced with. So onward. Before I get started, I do want to invite any of you who are college program staff supporting students with intellectual disabilities to consider joining this private Facebook group that is just for people that are in this situation. They are college program staff. They are currently working at a college or a program that's supporting students with intellectual disabilities. And they are looking for some either help or want to offer some strategies that they are using. So the only thing you have to do when you look to join this program discussion group, the only question it's going to ask is, which college are you? Are you somebody who's supporting students with the ID, and which college are you coming from? So I invite any of you to do that. Some of the questions that Will has already shared with us, I want to be able to point you to this group. They're also have the same questions, and they're sharing resources. So for what I'm going to do today is just kind of talk about, okay, here's a little bit, it's hard to kind of get a pinpoint on how many colleges are impacted by this, but obviously this has been a big shock to all of us in trying to support students. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, but also the prevalence of students with ID that are currently enrolled in college with support. So how many potential students with ID are already impacted by this? And then I want to just kind of quickly go through a snapshot of the model that most of us are using to support students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, which is a supported education model. And now our efforts to take that supported education model and do it so remotely, not even that we have anybody in the community, that we are really doing this quite remotely. So I'm going to show you some examples of how one college coordinator has been coming up with 6 different plans for students. So obviously what we all know is that the colleges and the schools have been greatly impacted by coronavirus. And even as of March 11th, imagine that, how many days ago that was now, more than 100 institutes of higher ed had canceled classes and moved their coursework online. And the US Department of Education gave us broad approval to set up online instruction for students affected by these closures or suspensions. However, what we know is that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best model for many of the students with ID that many of us might be supporting. And that's what brings us all here. So just to kind of give you the landscape, the most current landscape we have of colleges in the United States that are supporting students with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So currently there's 288 programs within colleges and universities in the United States that are currently in this situation, basically. Other times I can tell you a little bit more about, the prevalence of higher and lower numbers across the country, but right now that doesn't really matter. What really matters is we're talking about a number of programs. These are all our colleagues here. These are all people that have the same questions and are coming up with solutions. The data that I wanted to be able to share is that from our last data, we see, this is from the last academic year, we see that there are about 981 students that were involved in these college programs during the 2018-2019 academic year. So we can assume that about the same number of students are in the 2019-2020 academic year, and we're talking about probably that many students that are impacted by this closure. And that's really, at this point, all I want to say about that there's a great deal of those. The other thing I guess I should say is that of those 981 students that were studied a year ago, 64% had intellectual disabilities and 32% had intellectual disabilities and autism or only autism. So it really is a great number of students that we are all concerned about. One thing that I want to make clear, and many of you probably are either working with students that are taking one or both of these pathways, but what I'm talking about, there's two pathways to think about. One is the traditional or matriculated student. That's the traditional pathway that many students, including many students with disabilities, are on this pathway, that they are taking placement tests and they are degree seeking, and they are in college with reasonable accommodations. It doesn't mean that they are not also quite challenged right now, but these are the students that are eligible for reasonable accommodations, and that's what you're going to hear about in the second presentation. What I'm talking about is those students who are in an alternative pathway or a non-matriculated pathway. These are the students that their advising might include person-centered planning. They might be pursuing an alternative credential or certificate. They may be degree seeking, but it's a far fewer percentage of those students seeking degrees. And how they are getting success in college is with individual supports and learning plans that include employment goals and often include mentors. So there's two ways of thinking about the two sessions today, and I'm talking about this alternative one. I apologize if this graphic is a little fuzzy, but all I'm trying to point out in here is that when we're talking about supported education, and that's really what students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, with supported education, they can be successful at college. But that means that what's built into is not only the traditional post-secondary planning that they get at the school or maybe with an advisor, but they have gone through disability services. They are getting the accommodations that they're eligible for. But on top of that, these are students that might need more support. So they might have some kind of an educational coach, And that might be somebody that's hired by the college, or if they are in a dual enrollment situation, they might be getting coaching from someone that's coming from the school, somebody who used to be an instructional assistant and might now be coaching them. These are students that are also probably getting support from a peer mentor if the college has a peer mentoring program. And that peer mentor might be helping them to engage socially, as well as to understand where resources are on the campus. And then it also means that the students are getting more support to be self-determined and use their own self-advocacy skills. So it's beyond what disability services can provide, but it means that it's built in these other supports. And so for those of us that are supporting these kinds of students, here's what's tricky for us, is that they didn't just lose disability services and they didn't just lose faculty in their traditional sense, but now we have to figure out how are they getting these kinds of supports that are helping them to be successful. So just so I can be clear about what supported education is, the definition of supported education is that it's a process of helping students with disabilities to reach their personal educational goals. Supported education programs provide encouragement and connect students to resources at their school and in the community. There you go, right there. We have a problem, right? We don't have the connections to the school and the community as we understood it 3 weeks ago. But still, that's the model that most of us understand, that this is how we are helping these students to be successful. Supported education is really kind of grounded in 3 principles. One is that we are building students and increasing their individual skills to be successful at college. That might be their academic skills, that might be their social skills, that might be their, their determination skills. The other principle is that we are increasing support from the environment. So we are helping them to take advantage of what kind of supports they can look to in their classroom, what kind of supports they can look to on the campus, what kind of supports they can get as built-in supports from supported education. And then the third principle is that we are really maximizing the fit between the individual and the environment. And if you've been supporting students on a campus, you probably have been working at all these principles into place as you have been supporting students this first half of the semester. And now what we're looking at is, okay, how are we going to maintain supported education and these principles when we are at so much of a distance? And I know for many of us, we want to help them to complete this semester, and the expectation is that students will complete the semester. But how are we going to do that with so much of this? We basically have to redefine how we're going to do this in a remote learning format. So supported education really is getting at these wraparound services that addresses 3 basic challenges. And I put the reference to this model because it actually comes from California. And there's a link there where you can find this guide. But I like the way they frame this, that what supported education is doing is it's really helping us to look at how do we promote access, how do we promote retention, and how do we promote outcomes for students. And these are the things that we are really challenged by. So when I talk about access, and what they're talking about is things like, typically, supported education is helping to orient students to the campus. It's having a contact person to connect with. It's learning about the resources. It's getting that additional support for maybe something like registration, and navigating transportation. So that all kind of covers what we mean by access. When we talk about retention, we're talking about ongoing on-site support to maintain and be successful at college in the classroom, on the campus, in activities, with peers. It means maybe having access to priority registration. Retention means that you're getting some access to tutoring or peer counseling. It means that you are getting opportunities for social activities and mentor programs. All those things kind of cover ways that we are helping students to retain their success and at college. And then finally, when we're talking about outcomes, we're talking about, as a result of this, we've got good service coordination. We've got skilled academic counseling for them. They've got a plan for a course of study and a credential, if that's what they're pursuing. They have opportunities for career development that's leading to employment, and they have ongoing monitoring and coaching. So I go back now and I say, okay, we've got some challenges really helping them with access. We've got some challenges keeping them, with our retention, keeping them engaged. And we definitely are having some challenges now in leading to outcomes. Not that, hopefully we're talking about one half of a semester here, but a half a semester is important for all students, but particularly for these students who I think many of us are afraid we are not going to engage them. The other thing I'll say before I show you some examples now is that supported education really is built on some options for support. And typically what you'll see, and when I go back to that map I showed you in the United States of all those programs, they are probably using one or more of these kinds of personnel support. So they either have peer mentors that are helping them, they might have peer coaches, and those peer coaches might be not only serving as social navigators, but they might be helping a little bit with academic support for students. They might have an educational coach. That's a model that we have in Massachusetts, but it's a model that I think is in a number of states where they might, especially if they have dual enrollment, they might have somebody that's supporting them for several hours on the campus. And then there might be these e-mentors. And guess what? Of all of those, we kind of only have e-mentoring right now. I mean, we might be able to build in some other supports, but basically keeping ourselves at a distance means that we are only looking at this one option here, is this e-mentoring. Now, e-mentoring means that we can do video, we can do phone, we can do Skype, we can do WhatsApp. I mean, there's a lot of options, but it's still at a distance, which is not necessarily the way we were accustomed to giving these students support. Having a contact person is something that's really important. So an e-mentor allows us to still have that point, that access point, so we're able to still have some connection with these students. If we're helping them to learn about resources, which many of us are having to do now, again, that's about access. And then the ongoing monitoring support is a part of our outcomes. So to some extent, it doesn't mean this is completely lost. We have some ways that we are still able to maintain supported education. It's just that it looks really different right now. And it's a thin layer of all the ways that we traditionally have been able to do that. But there are some efforts, there are some ways that we can demonstrate our effort at keeping students engaged at college. So now I'm just going to, with the rest of my time, I just want to share 6 examples of how somebody right now at a college in Northeast United States is helping the 6 students that he had at college. Some of them were first semester students, and others had been there for 2 academic years. But they all are students to consider to have intellectual disabilities. They all came with supports. Some of them, so supports came from the school. who are also not able to support them anymore necessarily. I mean, they are trying to figure that part out. But they were getting these college-based transition services where a good deal of their time, their learning was on the campus. And then they also had 2 paid educational coaches. One, a parent was paying for this educational coach. Another one, a school had been sending a coach. And then on the campus, they had these 2 peer mentors that they were paying through work study. So this model did have, up until 2 weeks ago, this is what they had. They had these 6 students, they had some supports, some from the school, some from the college. Every one of them had already got some support, some accommodations from disability services. But very quickly, they were like at college one day and not in college the next, which I think many of you probably experienced as well. What I'm going to show you now is the way that this college coordinator kind of addressed his supports with 6 students by looking at access. He was looking at their familiarity with Blackboard or Zoom, which are both access issues. He was looking at how to engage the students, which is based on looking at retention and outcomes. And he also was looking at how are we going to support them. So, just based on all the potential challenges, this was the way he kept these 4 things in mind as he was trying to support them and is continuing to support them. So this is actually this week. This is what we've been talking about this week. I've been working with him, and this is what we've been working on. So first of all, we had Emmanuel. He is a 2nd semester student, and he's taking a history class called Comic Books in America. Loves the class. Is very confused about why he's not there. So what Jason is doing to support Emmanuel is he was talking to him on the phone and also including his parents on this conversation to confirm that he had access to a laptop, a headset, and a webcam. And yesterday they found out, okay, he doesn't have a webcam. He does have a phone that he could use, but he does need to have that webcam because the instructor wants to use Zoom. And so the instructor wants to be able to see him and get him logged in. And so that's what they were working on next. This is was already accustomed to 1 class out of 3 every week being online. So he was more comfortable with the in-person classes, but Jason was lucky that Emmanuel had some sense of working with Blackboard, which was what the university uses. That learning management system that they use is Blackboard. The instructor had already sent a tutorial on how to use Zoom because Emmanuel wasn't the only person who, even though the instructor was using Blackboard, he was doing an asynchronous class. So now he said, okay, I'm going to make all the classes synchronous, but that meant Emmanuel needs to learn how to use Zoom. So the first thing they were working on was going through the tutorial to learn Zoom. To engage him, they were looking at how to schedule a time and a place at home to maintain that schedule. Something that I think probably a lot of us have seen is how to put a schedule back in place for them. And then as far as supporting them, in this case, the college coordinator was emailing his partner, the transition teacher at his school, to see if there was a way that the school coach who had been coming to the campus, was he still being paid? And could he at least support him by phone or Zoom? And if he could start with Zoom, if he could do it, could he start with Zoom since Emmanuel needed to practice using Zoom? So that's how they were looking at supporting Emmanuel, who at least had a little bit of experience with Blackboard, but not a synchronous class. So he was never doing a live class before. So that's what he was looking at. The next student is Paco. He is a 2nd-year student, so he had more experience with a music and culture class right now, one of the issues that they immediately came up with is that the home computer he had was not allowing him access, and that's because there was some parental, I forgot what you call that, but anyway, it was prohibiting him from getting into Blackboard for some reason. So the coordinator found a Chromebook, and before he gave it, they worked this out that he would put tabs on the Chromebook so that immediately he could get easy access to Blackboard and easy access to his email and easy access to Zoom. And with permission, he already set it up so that he didn't have to keep putting in his password. So that was going to make it easier for him to click and get into the program. And then the other thing he did with permission from the student is he pre-programmed the emails that the instructor would send to also come to him, only so he could try to help support this Paco at home. So we got his permission to do that, and that he feels that's going to help him to kind of keep him on track. He was familiar with using Blackboard, but he also is going to need a tutorial on Zoom. The university actually also posted a tutorial for faculty and students on using Zoom. So, and I think many of the colleges are doing that. So they were going to together look at that to make sure that he understood those directions. As far as engaging him, again, they were going to work on is how was he going to be able to remember to log in for his class. And this is a person whose parent had hired a coach to work with him. So what they were wondering is, now the coach can't physically be with him. So what they were looking at was, could the instructor add the ed coach to the class to be able to just quietly be in the class with Paco at the same time? So that was their next step, was just to see if they could get the coach added to the class, just to replace maybe sometimes sitting outside of the class to support him. Now could she get inside the class, only to help her and him work together for him to stay engaged in the class. Aurush is the next person. He's a second semester college student. He is also taking the college comic books in America class. Aurush was the person that he probably was the least worried, that Jason was the least worried about, and that's because he had already seen, he's a dually enrolled student, so he had to learn that you come to college on your school vacation and you don't come to college during the college's spring break. And he had already seen that he knew to come to college independently. He was coming to the college during the school vacation, and he was able to see, he knew where to go, he knew what to get ready for. He was already using Blackboard. In fact, he had a class that he could have done from home, but he liked being on college so much that he came to the campus and found a computer in the adaptive computer lab to use to access his class. So Jason had already seen that he really did understand how to use Blackboard. His next question was, did he know how to use Zoom? Had that class been using Zoom? That's just not something he wasn't sure. As far as engaging him, again, he said that he felt like he was pretty sure he would stay engaged in this class because he had already seen him come during the February vacation, so he was pretty sure he was motivated to continue the class. But he wanted to double check that when he was coming to the college to use a computer, he wanted to double check, does he have a computer at home? He was pretty sure he did, but he also needed to check then is he does have a computer, right? And also, could the transition teacher see if that school coach could check in with him by phone? So that's one of the challenges that I've heard about, is if the schools are closed but still teaching, are those instructional assistants who are working as ed coaches still working with the students in the college. That was the major thing that they were working on with Aurush. With Jackie, this is interesting. She was taking a boating basics class. She was extremely motivated by this class. And they had the first half of the class, they were working through a certificate for boating safety. So they were pretty sure that that Jackie knew how to use Blackboard, but they were going to double check on that. The instructor had posted several demonstration videos, had sent an email and said, look, obviously we'd like to be on the water. That was the next part of the class. We're not going to be able to do that yet. So he had posted some demonstration videos. And so that's what they were working on now, is Jackie accessing these videos. And could there be some way of her, was the instructor going to be looking for some way to prove that they had, taking notes or commenting through a threaded discussion that they had watched the videos. They thought that Jackie was very motivated to be in this class, but thought that she could use a peer mentor to maybe make sure that she was still engaged in the class, because they had never really seen her not physically in the class, so they just weren't sure. So that's what Jackie's was. Just two more now. So Francis is a first semester student. So he's brand new to all of this. They probably had the most questions about, are they going to be able to keep, Francis, are they going to be able to keep Francis engaged? He was in an English literature class. So Jason was calling Francis and his parents to confirm that he had access to a computer at home. He had a blended course with a threaded discussion, and so he just needed to confirm, was Francis familiar with using the threaded discussion and the assignment drop box? He was working with a peer mentor on the campus, and so what Jason was then, I'm just jumping ahead to support, so this class required that he writes reaction papers, and he was getting support to write those weekly reaction papers. So what they're working on this week is, can they still get the peer mentor to check in with him, even by Zoom or phone, to support him completing his work, which meant now making sure that he could access Blackboard and the features of threaded discussion and the assignment drop box. Luckily, he had been using those features to submit his papers, but the peer mentor had always been there sort of coaching him. So now they wanted to make sure that he could do it without her. Then the retention tips was, how could they schedule some check-ins, maybe even 3 times a week. And again, another question was, would it be possible to add the mentor into this class just for support, just to kind of keep on track as to how the instructor might have been changing anything in the class, because now they thought the syllabus alone might have changed to accommodate this change that we all are experiencing. The final story I'm going to tell you is Josie. And I bring up Josie because Josie was the person that they actually had more concerned with, not because of the academics, but because Josie was a first semester student who was just really learning how to be in college. And she was taking an orientation to college and careers class. But she was really learning, adjusting to being in college, adjusting to how college, she had some anxiety and sometimes wasn't able to stay in the class full time, but she was making a lot of progress. And so the questions they had was, okay, does she have a computer? And is she going to engage and do the work that she really needed a peer mentor to help her with? So their most important goal was really helping her to gain some social skills and acclimation to college, that kind of was going out the window. So what they were trying to say is, for her, could the goal really be more about continuing social interactions with her peer mentor, even more than the work that she was doing in class, even though they wanted her to do that? But to start with, could she translate from in-person social interactions to Zoom or phone interactions? So I'm just going to end here by saying this is really this is how Jason and others have been really looking at using that supported education model. They basically said, we're looking at access and programming tabs and passwords and all of that. How do we get that set up? Are they familiar with the online learning management system and the tutorials that could help them? We did a lot of conversations about understanding and documenting what is the expectation for synchronous or asynchronous classes and their schedules, and then finally what kind of supports. And I probably went over my time, so I apologize. Thank you very much. I look forward to any questions.
Good. If you could leave the screen, I was going to say you could leave it right where you were. But since you've already removed it, we can have Dr. Therfil Brown share her screen and be ready to go. A couple of things that I'd like to respond to, and then a couple of questions for you, Dr. Paiwanski. So first, to Derek Allenby. I saw your hand. I'm not sure if you had a question or not. If you have a question, please feel free to insert it into the chat box. I want to thank and commend everyone that's communicating through the chat function. The exchanges have been lovely. And there's a question regarding whether or not there's a way to copy the information from the chat feature. I believe all of that is being recorded onto my computer, and I will share that with everyone so that you have the wealth of the information that's being shared there. Questions for you, Dr. Paiwanski? Someone asked before, you mentioned the name of a Facebook group. If you could insert that name of the Facebook group into the chat box, that would be great, so that everyone has access to that.
Yes.
There's a question, was the populations that you were referencing in your first couple of slides, were they credit or non-credit or both?
Oh, so what a good question. I apologize. It was a combination. So there were students that were taking it for credit, and there were some students that were not taking it for credit. So the stakes were high for both anyway, but certainly for the students taking it for credit, we were particularly in these conversations looking at how do we make sure that they could potentially complete all the requirements for the credits.
Thank you for that. This person asked for you to discuss how to help students manage the emotions that come with technical issues, as those challenges, particularly now, are inevitable.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I'm just going to tell you about my conversation with Jason Wheeler here, is that he also said the same thing. I'm afraid that they're going to get exasperated and just quit. And so our meeting Friday actually, is what kind of a schedule do we need to be on with these students? And how do we keep ongoing communication, either by practicing with them with these check-ins, and then see if they will begin to initiate these, because you're absolutely right. The anxiety and the exasperation is likely going to increase. And because I mean, we deal with this all the time, and we just know we have to kind of persevere, or we look to someone to help us. And we don't always have someone now that we can depend on to help these young people. We don't know. So what our plan is to kind of build in like half day or daily check-ins, and then see if we can get them to start initiating some of those check-ins.
Thank you so much. I'll ask one more question and then we'll let Dr. Jane Therfel-Brown proceed. The last question for you at the moment, Dr. Paiwanski, is can you share any online platforms that might be conducive for e-mentoring? Maybe this is something that you might want to insert into the chat box as well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I will do that. E-mentoring platforms. Yep. Okay. I will put some in.
Okay, I do see one more question, so I guess I've lied. One more question, and then that'll be it. Did you do these practice sessions individually with students?
Yes, we did not have any groups. I will tell you that if some of you join that Facebook page, and you know what, actually the name of that, I'm going to put it in anyway, but the name, that's why I took a screenshot of the front page of it so you'd be able to readily access it, but I will put the name in. There are some people that we're talking about, there's a program, Aggies Elevate, I think. They had actually done a Zoom call with all the students that they were supporting and walked through some of these tutorials with the students. And then there was another college program that did the same thing. So there are some that were doing a group. And in Jason's case, he felt like it was easier for him to do it one-on-one with them. There were only 6 of them. Some of these programs may be supporting up to 15, 20 students, but he only had 6. So he felt he was at a point where he could do it one-on-one.
Thank you very much. We will proceed. Monica, I see your 2 questions. I will continue to record the questions, and I promise we will provide additional time once Dr. Jane Therfel-Brown has completed her presentation. To those of you who are messaging and communicating through the chat, if you could continue to indicate your institution, that would be helpful to people who may want to follow up with you after the presentation. And without further ado, Dr. Jane Therfel-Brown, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. I appreciate all the work that you did, Will, to get all of us together today. I know it was, especially from my end, I know for me, it was like you herding cats to get me, get all organized. So I really appreciate it. And thank you all for taking the time. This is such a difficult time for all of us. And colleagues keep saying, well, gee, all of you in higher ed must have nothing to do. You must just be sitting home. And I keep saying, oh my gosh, you're so wrong. I'm more overwhelmed now than ever. So I think all of us are struggling to meet the needs of our students. And I'm going to try and give you very practical strategies as much as I can and as quickly as I can, because we're doing this in a short time span. Thank you so much, Maria, for the really helpful information. The best I can to time my information in. So I want to start with this from a quote from Harvey Bloom from The Atlantic. Neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. Who can say what form of wiring will prove best at any given moment? I think this quote is so true for us right now. It may be someone with autism with the intense focus that many of our folks have. That may be the person that finds one of these cures for COVID-19 or finds a treatment or can help us figure out how to get hospital beds or ventilators working. We have to think about the fact that our folks on the spectrum perceive the world differently and think differently. We've talked a bit this afternoon about technical difficulties and frustrations for our students. I'm about to throw one at all of you. I apologize in advance, but I sent Will slides last night, and which was late. I apologize again, Will, and I've changed them since. So I don't mean to mess you up. I know you got them ahead of time. I only took a couple out and I substituted a couple. I will send this version, which is not terribly different, but I would love to say this. I wanted to make you feel the way our students feel with technical difficulties, but I'd be lying. I just changed the slides. soon before the presentation. So we know by numbers and the national statistics that we're dealing with a lot of students with autism, and especially for those of you that are in the California community colleges. And I see from the chat boxes, there are people from other places around the country, many of whom I've interacted with. I know you have large numbers of students with autism on your campus, some who are working through an ID program, some who are working through an autism program, and some who are in general working through disability services for accommodations. We have large numbers, and because of those large numbers, I know it's not possible for anyone to work really one-on-one with a lot of students. Some have that opportunity. I was reading in the chat box with one school who is keeping up one-to-one work and doubling the amount of hours. How incredibly wonderful. And if you can do that, that's a gift. Most are trying to do things in a very different way, like work with groups when they can, and trying to do things like we've all talked about Zoom a lot. The Zoom tutorials, I've given about 6 of them already this week. I think those are getting popular, but also anything that we can do that we can address the large numbers in a group, I think are important. And I'm going to address that during my short time today. But with that, I want us to keep in mind for students with autism, the idea of sensory overload. And I use this wonderful quote from a brilliant young man at the Rochester Institute of Technology. The sun is too loud. It's as if everything I can see has a corresponding auditory of high notes and crashes to concentrate, even to walk upright. It feels like everyone is talking at once and you don't know who to listen to. Well, imagine taking this very bright young man and now putting him on a Zoom class, needing to look at pictures of 20 other students. That may be more than some of our students can do. And I think one of the best things we can do is suggest to some students that they can turn off a video occasionally if they need. Some students may not be capable of seeing all those faces and still paying attention to the class. And I think we need to think of sensory issues as we're working through all of the things that our students are dealing with. We know students with autism have a lot of great strengths, as I've detailed on the left-hand side. And the adherence to rules and loyal and trustworthy and reliability, all of those are sort of thrown out the window right now, because all of that has changed. But those other things, like avoiding classroom politics and enjoying routine work, very direct communication style and attention to detail, those could help students as they're moving to things online. But we've developed some new obstacles because now we have new routines and the culture is totally different, as are the social expectations. And where students were depending on staff and professionals to assist them in understanding those expectations, now that communication is interrupted. And that search process of finding resources on campus, now it's changed again, because how do I find online resources? So what I want to do in short time today is go over some strategies for how to do that. And one of the first things we need to remember is that for students with autism, anxiety is one of the top symptoms. And so this entire change is causing an awful lot of anxiety. And we need to assist students with some coping strategies, because they may not be, any strategies they were using on campus may be different online. Because we know that change is a barrier for students on the spectrum, and many of our students act really poorly to change. As students have been sent home to study, these changes are difficult to accept, just as they are for all of us. We're all changing our routines, and none of us knows what the next few weeks will bring. However, we really need to use as much reassurance as possible to quell anxiety. And of course, that's necessary for all students, but that right now is one of the best accommodations we can put into place for students. This is also true for students with general anxiety disorder, other mental health issues. Students with autism especially may be anxious to know the plan for the coming weeks. That's what I'm hearing a lot. But are you sure we're not going back to class? Are you sure they're going to make us stay online now? How do you know we're not going back? And I can show them newspaper articles and official things from the university, and all people keep saying is, well, yes, but they also told me at the beginning of this semester that I'd be going to class in person. And now how do I know this is true? That unknown is really difficult, and it's difficult for us to try and address with students. One of them, if any of you have heard me speak before, then you know that one of the things I talk about is that for college students, two of the biggest issues for those with autism are motivation and initiation. And online study really poses a barrier in this area, because now students have to be motivated to complete work independently and to be able to initiate those assignments and initiate study time. The best we can do is assist students with structure and schedules. And we've talked about that. And again, it's very hard to do that if you can't do one-on-one, because everyone's schedule and structure is going to be different. But as much as possible, getting students to use some sort of structure and put a schedule together online or on paper is really important. That structure is where a lot of our students with autism really thrive. And because students are returning home, and sometimes there's other people there who are working from home or studying, and that makes it really difficult. The lack of structure and sameness is really challenging. And what we want to do is assist students to create structure. A lot of us have been doing that for ourselves all this week and last week. Where are we going to have coffee? What are we going to do in between our meetings? How are we going to use the internet when other people aren't using it? It's difficult if students have classes online and they're held at if they're held at the same time as they were in person. That can be a little easier for structure. And what we're trying to do is help students to build their schedule around a certain time. I had a student last night say to me, but this is the time that I go to that coffee house I like and get coffee. And, my response was, well, let's figure out how you're going to have some sort of drink or caffeinated drink at home, and when you can't go to the coffee house. But that was a hard routine for the student to break. And a lot of us are having trouble breaking our routines too. We've talked a little bit about the social isolation, which I heard today some people changing that term to physical distancing from social distancing, which does make sense, because most of us now are trying to really be social online. We work really diligently to assist all of our students to be really social on campus. That's what most of the programs are for. And now we've really interrupted all of that by forcing isolation. So you really want to encourage students to keep up their social contacts online with Skype, with FaceTime. I ran a group this week. We did a tutorial on Zoom, and then we had a group just so everybody could see each other and catch up and talk about how frustrated they were. I had been telling Maria and Will, I've run a few groups this week in the evening for parents. And oh my gosh, as difficult as it is for the students, these parents are just beside themselves. They are so worried about their students regressing. They are so worried about how to not be too intrusive, but the students seem to be acting like they did in high school. And they don't know what to do. So I think as much as we can invite people to talk amongst each other, even when we don't have time to, just setting things up or even setting up a group is really helpful and probably necessary at this time. This is something I'm really worried about, screen and game addiction. College students in general are vulnerable to screen and game addiction, and students with autism in particular. And now we're telling students, okay, now you're going to be online all day. The only thing we can do, and hopefully it will have a side effect of helping with schedules, is using some sort of timing device to take screen breaks. We really need to, and if we're building schedules, if we're lucky enough to work one-to-one at some point with the students and build schedules, we really need to do that with screen breaks and getting outside and making sure people are sleeping. And this is really important for all of us too. Suddenly, we've always spent a lot of time on the computer, but nowhere near what we're doing now. And we need breaks. We need to get outside. We really need self-care. We're telling our students about it, but we need it desperately. The screen and game addiction, I am concerned about. And I've often worked with students who were on a screen or gaming for 18 hours a day, and now they're skipping classes to be online. And I think we have to think about that in a very different way and help students to get offline. Even get back online for classes or lectures, but as much as they can, reading their textbooks, hopefully in a hard copy. I know a lot of our students need the voice output also, but this is something we really need to be watchful for. So I want to talk a few minutes about adjusting study habits, and I want to use a wonderful document from the University of Michigan Academic Innovation Center, and I gave you the link here. If you have more than one device that you can use right now, if you want to call that up, the next few slides are all from that document. It's a wonderful document that I encourage you to share with your students and share with your colleagues. I've shared it really widely the past couple weeks, and it's really excellent. I'm just doing snippets from it, but and I'm going to take the document, show you how it's hopefully how it can help us for students with autism. And again, I want to thank the people from the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan for not only putting together a great document, but doing it in such a timely fashion. So the document starts with the words, "We'll get through this together," and with this paragraph. Things may feel out of control right now. You may be facing a lot of unknowns and disruptions. Try to be patient with yourself, your classmates, and your instructors at this time. Take care of your well-being first. Making a plan and adjusting your studying may help you feel even a little sense of control. I think this is really true. People really feel out of control. Nobody knows what's coming next. We all keep saying to each other, oh my gosh, life has changed so much in the past week or in the past 3 days, and we don't know how much more will change in the next 3 days. I think saying that out loud and telling students that we feel that way too, we can help create a sense of calm with all of us. So I'm going to go through the main points that this document goes through. Your coursework and teamwork may have to be online and remote, and here are some of the strategies, because now study habits really have to change. Staying organized, this can be crucial for students with autism, and with so many things changing, asking students those key pieces. I think this is really, if you ask them to remember what the first week of classes was like, and how out of control they felt and how they didn't know where anything was, and that confusion, but at a finals week pace. I think that puts it really well, and I think students can then think back to, gee, yeah, that first week was really tough, but now I feel when I was on campus that I knew what was going on. And then having people really keep track of each class. And if you're lucky enough to have one-to-one, but I did this week with a group and asked everybody to document, are the in-person parts of the class changing? That is changing. Are assignments changing? Are there new due dates? How are we submitting the assignments? Is that changing, or are we still going to upload them on Blackboard or Canvas? Are quizzes or exams all being offered virtually, or because I get an accommodation, do I still go onto the campus? There's been a lot of discussion about that if you're on the AHEAD or DISHI listservs. And no, students with disabilities should not need to go to campus to take exams. But we'll talk about that a little later with assistive technology, because some students use assistive technology for exams that they might not have at home. What do you do if you need help? Who do you go to? How do you ask questions during an online class? Some students need really explicit directions for how to do that. Avoid multitasking. There's a good one for all of us. If you're doing more work on your own and your time is less structured, you're tempted to multitask. But as we know, most people can't do more than one thing at a time. So even if you feel like you're multitasking, you're probably not. You're really just switching. If you're switching between tasks. For students with autism, what it means is assignments then can take a lot longer. We know one of the main symptoms of autism is having intense focus on something very narrow. Well, if you try to multitask, but one of your real strengths is that intense focus, multitasking doesn't work very well, and you're likely to not only make a lot of mistakes, but remember a lot less. So really getting people to focus back on just what they're doing. And in this document, they call it the magic of monotasking. I think we all need to do that, even post-coronavirus, but I like the idea of the magic of monotasking. The next is a really good idea. Thinking about making the most of video lectures and sticking to the instructor's schedule. Staying on that schedule helps having a feeling of normalcy and prevent you from falling way behind. Closing distracting tabs and apps. I think that's very true. Many of you right now are probably doing 3 or 4 things at once. You might be listening to this, glancing at these slides, probably trying to do an email, especially if you have more than one device, and probably texting at the same time. That's pretty common for most of us, especially higher ed professionals. We thrive on multitasking. That's the way it's going to get our students way behind, and we need to model for them and try and help them to focus. And it has a lot to do with the area that they're working in. Setting a work area is going to be really important. If it's a kitchen table where there's a lot going on, it may not work as well for students. And also watching the video lectures, if they're asynchronous, watching them at regular speed. A lot of our students drop to a speed and a half, or that way they can take less time to listen to a lecture, and they miss an awful lot by doing that. Setting a schedule. We know that this is incredibly important, and this document also gives some sample templates for schedules, but there's fewer social commitments, fewer group meetings. I liked on the chat where somebody was saying that they were assisting students with figuring out how to attend their student activities and clubs online, which I think is wonderful. That's how we maintain our social commitments. But I heard from a colleague the other day that they've changed that acronym known as FOMO, fear of missing out, to JOMO, joy of missing out. And I do like that a lot. I think that a lot of us are finding that with our schedules less busy, or hopefully we're going to become less busy, that you can miss some things and not feel like, oh gosh, how come, gee, why don't I have time? So you really want to set a schedule and a structure and really include that exercise and self-care. And I think that's even more important for all of us, because I know personally what I've found the past few weeks that during the virus is I've really had to be the person calming a lot of students and their families down, and sometimes talking a few disability service providers off the ceiling too. And so I need to keep really calm. But if I don't take a few breaks, then I'm no help to all of those people either. So it's in my best interest personally and professionally to make sure that I'm taking some time to calm off the screen too. For people with autism, that's really hard because as students get really ramped up, you've all seen it, I'm sure, with your folks on the spectrum, it's very hard then to wind down. So making sure that students know some of the ways they can calm, and when things get difficult, that you can help them implement those strategies, that will help tremendously. And then changing some of your strategies. And as we said in number 1, change is really difficult. Our routines have to adjust, and we have to look for ways to adapt new habits. And if you usually study in one place, you may have to create a new routine, and that may need assistance. If you always study by yourself and now you have to study in a group, or you have to have services delivered in a group format, that may be different, but it may be end up being more effective for the student when they hear how other students do things. People's schedules might be more open, and they might be able to think about working in different ways, taking more time to listen to a lecture again, or to go over notes. But I think one of the most important things we have to think about with folks on the spectrum is how difficult that is for students who are rigid and concrete. And then one of the most difficult for folks on the spectrum working with a group or team, it's going to be very different doing that remotely. I say that, and in some work last night with a student who was really resistant to working from home, is very resistant to change, and has been thrown into upheaval over all of this, and then was told that they had to work with a group. I really thought it was going to be difficult, and when I asked her how it was going, she said it was non-stop relief. And those words were so powerful. I said, explain that to me. And she said, well, when we're on campus, I have to meet with them in person, and I can't do that. I'm uncomfortable with the physical proximity. I'm uncomfortable having to look at people, small talk. But now we were online, and I could ignore what I needed to ignore, and then I could just get involved in the work. And that said a lot to me, and I think we have to keep that in mind, that some of what we think for students with autism that might be the most difficult might actually be, in this student's brilliant term, nonstop relief. What a great term. The document that I've shared gives more info on the group work and other things, but I can let you look through that while I go over some other things, that because I believe, and Will's correct me, I think I have 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes. Okay. So I want to talk about this for a moment, and this is work from Barry Prezant and Fields Meyer. I have the citation on the next slide. And they talk about all the comorbidities that we know exist with autism, about sleep disruptions, gastrointestinal issues, selective eating, epilepsy, ADHD. But what we know is that anxiety and depression are the number 1 and 2 symptoms for students for anyone with autism. And what Prezant and Fields Myers brilliantly tell us, that I think is so important at this time, is the opposite of anxiety isn't calm, it's trust. If I have autism and I trust that the people that know me and work with me can help me through things, if I trust that I know what I'm doing in my classes, if I can trust that I understand how my day works, that is a huge barrier to anxiety. We have now taken that trust and thrown it up in the air, and we're what falls. And what Prezant and Fields Myers explained to us is that autism then becomes a disability of trust. So that we have to consider that every student with autism that we're working with, we have taken their anxiety because of them not trusting, like I mentioned before, about how can I trust that classes will stay online when I first came to school, everybody said that classes would be in person. I can see that, as the title of their book states, Uniquely Human, a Different Way of Seeing Autism, people with autism see the world differently. We need to think about this issue of trust and how we're going to work with students and first build that trust so that we can get work accomplished. The other piece that I want you to be very aware of, and we're trying to quickly, at least a newsletter article out about this now, is I'm thinking of it in terms of students with autism, but I think it's true for all of us and all of our students. When we do return to some type of typical life, we have to really think about these trust issues, but we also have to be sensitive to PTSD. The post-traumatic stress on all of us, and especially our students, and particularly our students in the two populations that we've talked about today, these are going to have some far-reaching circumstances that we have to be proactive about. And I think that's crucial for everyone. I know I'm out of time and we want to take lots of questions. So I want to thank you for all you do for your students and families. And right now, especially, I think a lot of our students and their families don't have the capacities to say thank you because they're just too overwhelmed. So I want to thank all of you for them and for me, because thank you for all you're doing for these students, and that even taking the time today to think about how we can do a better job. So please stay well, and Maria and I are ready to answer questions in the time we have left. I'm just showing you books and then how to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you so much. Will, do we have some questions?
We do. Thank you so much. Monica, if you could please get back to me about whether or not your question had been responded to sufficiently, that would be great. You can place an answer either in the Q&A or in the chat box. From the chat box, are there resources or talking points for parent conversations?
Some of those, and I think, Maria, I want you to answer also. I've done 2 groups for parents this past week. I think I'm doing a couple more next week, and I've been trying to take things from that. We're trying to put together and I can send that to Will, just a question and answers from the parents' point of view, because we're getting really good questions. And I think the parents have had to become service provider, and they're not only not used to that role, the students don't accept the same teaching, if you will, or direction from their parents. So I think we need to guide them as much as possible. And we're creating resources. Again, as I said to a parent last night, I wish I had a pandemic handbook that I could open up and give you a good answer. I don't. A pandemic handbook doesn't exist. But we're trying to create a sheet, and I will get it to Will as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. Dr. Paiwansky, did you have a response as well?
Yeah, 2 things. I just posted a link to some, Think College has a number of resources for families, and I posted a link that brings you directly to family resources. But in response to the issues that we're addressing right now, I wanted you to know that Think College also has a private family Facebook page. And I think that's by going right onto directly onto the Think College website, and maybe even to the, oh yes, on that link that I sent you at the very bottom, it's a Facebook group for parents. And my suggestion is this is the place where people are talking right now about this. So that's where I would direct people.
Thank you so much. To everyone who has participated in this call, I just need to point this out to you. We just left a link in the chat box. It's from Dr. Catherine Hayward. It says, as you leave, please respond to a short evaluation about today's evaluation. It's really short. It's not just being said that way. And the reason why I'm asking for you to complete that is it will help inform webinars like these. I'm seeing some favorable comments in the chat box. Someone said, thank you, Jane, great information and great points for thought. Someone else said, Jamie Cole said, both speakers gave me great ways of thinking and ideas to move forward with the success of our students. Thank you. But it's good if all of you could participate in this evaluation, so please do. Moving to the next question that I saw, if I can get there again. This question is whether or not DSPS has a treasure group or can one be created to list resources for various supports. I don't know if one already exists. If someone could respond to that in the chat box, that would be great. I think it's a good idea because if we could keep sharing resources, that would be a great thing. And if someone has a treasure group or someone wants to create it and you send it to me, I will share it with everyone who has participated in this call. Okay, I'm looking for additional questions. Here's one. Aaron wants to know, I believe it was you, Dr. Prawansky, that stated, gave information about a webinar that's being held on Friday. This person wants to know what is the topic of the webinar and how can one register for it?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Did I mention a webinar? There is wait a minute. Let me just tell you something. Okay. Based on this very topic here, that private Facebook group is hosting a meeting on Thursday. I think I was saying there was another one on Friday from the Association for Persons with Supported Employment that's already full. If that's the one I was talking about, but there's another one that's going to be just for people that are program coordinators. And by joining that Facebook group, you would then get the information for that webinar on Thursday at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
And there's another for students with autism and college service providers. There's the College Autism Network is having a Zoom or a call tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern. And that's just to share resources during the pandemic.
Thank you. So Rachel Goodwin, I see your comment regarding copying and pasting of the evaluation. You just really need to click on the link and that should open up in a separate window, I believe. But yes, I will indeed send a link via email. While I'm waiting for additional questions, here's one. Offering advice and support to instructors who have students with ID and ASD in their classroom, but who have not disclosed their disability. So this is an interesting one. So what suggestions do you have for faculty who have an individual, a student in their classroom who they suspect have either an intellectual disability or autism, and they have not yet disclosed that, do not have a letter from the DSPS office? How should the faculty member address that situation?
I would like to address that, Will, and then before we close the webinar, I want to make sure we address some of the employment and job questions that were on the list that was sent to you before the webinar.
Yeah.
For the faculty about students who are not disclosed, what I'm encouraging faculty to do is the same that we ask them to do when we're in person on campus, and that's if you suspect someone's really struggling in your class, accommodations, you want to ask them one of two questions, never mentioning disability or ID or autism, but just ask if they had support in high school. And most students will say, well, yeah, there was somebody I went to once a day, or, you know, twice a week or whatever. Well, gee, we might have some of those supports on campus. Have you gone to DSPS, or have you gone to disability services? Have you been to the academic support center? Once the student is connected at one of those places, usually they can get the student to disability services. And often either they weren't sure how to get accommodations on campus, or they really didn't want to tell anybody. And once they realize they may not be able to stay if they don't disclose, often we can get people to, no, maybe not often. Sometimes we can get students to disclose and request accommodation.
Thank you for that. So, are there specific questions that you want to address now from the questions we received, or we have 11 of them? I don't know that we can cover them all.
Oh,
yeah.
We won't get to all of them, but the last three, and Maria and I had talked about these before we started, that the last three really deal with how to keep students engaged in pursuing employment. I mean, we're so concerned about both of these populations in employment after they finish their post-secondary experience, and we want to make sure that that continues during this difficult time, especially if students are about to graduate. So Maria, do you want to talk about what you knew about, and then I'll give our resources?
I'm so sorry, Jane. I was starting to respond to another question. Can you tell me again which one?
Just what we talked about with the
the employment.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I had seen that question, and I wanted people to know, again, that private Facebook page, there are some people that are talking about how to adjust employment and internship experiences. And I think it's Aggies Elevate that had shared a list of how they adjusted the employment and internships so that they didn't have to give up on it, but they just had to make some adjustments. If that isn't, if that isn't available, or I'm happy to send that to Will, but it was a nice list of how they've adjusted it. And then the other thing was about the APSE conference. I think somebody's also mentioning it here. It is full. I think they could only take 300 people. I have a colleague that's very engaged in that organization. So I'm going to ask if there's by any chance another that might be offered.
The resource I wanted to bring up is Neurodiversity at Work, and they have a website, Neurodiversity at Work. They're a repository for jobs and have sources for job coaching and internships, and they are taking the lead in this area during this difficult time. There are lots of conversations going on the HEAD listservs and DSHE, Disability Services in Higher Ed, talking a lot about internships and job placement and interviews.
Okay, so is there additional information that you'd like to cover, Dr. Brown, regarding any of the other questions that we received?
The assistive technology, Will, to tell you the truth, I mean, whoever is having those questions, I'm happy to answer what I can on email. I think that's a whole other webinar of how we're doing assistive technology and accessible technology.
Okay, great. I would just like to double back to one more thing, and then perhaps we can begin to wrap up. And that is that the question came from Lisa Yates. There was a clarification on the question that I previously asked. She was saying she has been advising an English instructor before the COVID-19 crisis and helping with 2 students who have an intellectual disability. She's guessing that that instructor will struggle even more now that the campus has gone online. And it sounds like she hasn't told the instructor that the student has an ID. She is anticipating, however, that there will be more instructors who will be frustrated, not knowing how to help students with these challenges.
Maria, do you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, I was just reading this last comment here. Yeah, I was actually posting a couple of resources. I think the way that I would probably start addressing this is just kind of promoting universal design. And I know that seems like a cop-out, but I do feel like if there was, at this point, we're really just talking about finding ways of getting accommodations or universal design for assignments, not the syllabus or not the whole class, but maybe just for the assignment. And I guess that would probably be the first approach I would take, because I see some of these comments we're saying where people are already feeling negative about having to do this kind of remote teaching, and certainly not going to make things more accessible. But the truth is, that's probably the approach I would take.
Great, thank you.
Rachel, and I wanted to say, I started to put some, I'm sorry, I put some links to 2 resources that I thought would be starting points on Think College for universal design samples. So I'll finish.
Oh, great, thank you so much. Again, I want to thank everyone for the robust conversations in the chat area. Dr. Hayward has inserted a comment for some of you who seem to be having trouble with the evaluation link. We will be sure to provide that to you via email. So I just want to add in closing that support for today's webinar came from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office through a contract that enables us to provide technical assistance and training to California community colleges who are working to provide equitable supports and services, as well as opportunities for students with disabilities. Today, we specifically featured supports for students with an intellectual disability and autism. Of course, we provided this training in wake of the coronavirus. The Tarjan Center, you should know, is working very closely with our federal partners. They include the University of Southern California and UC Davis Centers for Excellence on Developmental Disabilities. We're also working with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities, the Disability Rights California, as well as the Department of Developmental Services to get information out to communities related to the COVID-19 virus. We will provide an email in which we will offer additional resources through links to you. I noticed that online Aaron Markovitz has provided additional information on some training that will be coming up. I will share that information with everyone. I want to take this time to thank everyone who joined us today as participants. And I want to thank our presenters, Dr. Maria Paiwanski and Dr. Jane Theophil Brown, for sharing from the wealth of their knowledge with the California community colleges, as well as our partners across the country. Thank you everyone for participating. There have been questions about receiving the materials, the content from the chat box. I will provide that to you via a link, as well as we will be providing a link so that you can get access to the audio and video of this presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. Please do not forget to complete the short evaluation. That information will be useful for us as we plan additional webinars in the future. Thank you everyone. Have a great day and please be safe. I will give a couple of minutes for additional questions or comments. I notice people are still typing into the chat box, so I'll keep it open for a few more minutes. Thank you, Dr. Prywansky, and thank you, Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Will.
You're
Thank
welcome.
You.
Will, I'm trying to get an answer for somebody from Rachel Martinez about being able to use Speak It on Canvas. So thank you for keeping this open while I try to get that answer.
Certainly. And if there are additional questions, since we're still here, please feel free to submit those. If we cannot answer them now, I will be certain to follow through by providing you an answer via email. Christina, thank you so much for your assistance today. Someone else is asking if we could share the link to the slides one more time. If you could place that link into the chat function, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Will, that's a really great idea about saving the chat, because there's so much great questions and so many great resources that everybody shared.
Yeah, I agree. I want to, because I didn't get to read a lot of them, and I really want to look at it. There was really good information.
I just wasn't able to finish reading through them, and there were some great ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, you had a lot of good people on.
Yeah, so my response to that is, on every other webinar that I do, the chat is a feature that is saved when the audio and video is saved. My fingers are crossed. This will be no different.
Okay.
I'm sure it will be, since you recorded, Will. Doesn't it usually come as an email?
So I believe,
I
believe I'm seeing that our captioner has also saved the history. Is that right, Doreen? We have a saved copy of. Oh, perhaps I see what this is. This is a recording of the transcription of what we said, but not the chat feature. But I believe we will have that available to us.
Great.
Dr. Prywansky, am I still waiting for a resource to be added? No, take your time. I'm just.
You know what? I told her before that if this got closed up before I got that answer, I would send you the answer. Do you know Rachel Martinez?
I do.
Okay. Would you mind if I can get that answer to you? Would you mind passing it on to her? It's actually just a yes/no question.
Okay, I will share. Yes, I will provide the response to Rachel.
Thank you. Okay, you can close it then.
I'll sign off then. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Maria.
Yes, thank you. Lovely working with both of you, all of you.
And you also.
Yeah, one second before you leave. I think I said something else.
Okay.
So this comes from Monica again. It says, right now I plan to call every student and/or care provider, parents, and access their computer, internet. I think she's saying she is planning to call students and providers to ensure that students have a computer and internet access. She says she knows that some of the students have computers, will make sure that she keeps contact with the students. Yeah, if everyone would do that, Monica, that's precisely what we're hoping will occur, because the level of engagement that we have with these students right now particularly could be impactful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's so important.
Additional comments? Yeah, great. Okay, thank you all. I will end the session now. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you. Take care, Will. Hope, and you too, Maria. Stay well.
Thank
both
you.
of you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.